Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Once again, we have a special edition of Fred Hampton Leftists. It's your boy, Social Sume. I have my co-host, Afeni, with me. Had to bring her along for this conversation. And we have a special guest. We have co-host of the Bad Faith podcast, former press secretary for Bernie Sanders, Briahna Joy Gray. Thank you for joining Fred Hampton Leftists.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's really great to be here with both of you.
Absolutely. The first thing I want to get into, obviously, left discourse has been pretty ridiculous ever since Nia Turner lost. There have been a lot of pointing going on, a lot of people punching down, right? Which the managerial left, they love to do that, by the way. So the first thing I want to ask you, and we can get started right into this conversation, what do you think went wrong with the Nia Turner campaign? Why do you think she lost, Bree?
Um, I'm no, expert, but the numbers seem to suggest that there weren't enough votes in more of the affluent parts of town, which of course were also targeted by the enormous amount of outside spending, dark money spending, from groups including pro-Zionist groups that really capitalized on Nina Turner's strong stance around the issue of Palestinian rights and turned out voters at higher levels in those neighborhoods in a way that gave Shontel Brown the edge. Now, of course, dark money is a part of the equation, but you also have to have a bigger conversation on the left about what to do about the fact that the establishment is always going to align in those ways to keep progressives from getting into office. And we have to have some serious, difficult conversations about how to overcome that particular obstacle. And I think the answers to that involve figuring out how to actually turn out this working class multiracial coalition that progressive movements depend on, instead of just kind of hoping and praying that the issues themselves are going to be enough to galvanize a population that has a lot of really good reasons not to come out to vote.
Well said. I had said on my show weeks ago, and I want to get your take on this to see if you agree with me. Because as I said before, there are a lot of excuses being made. And at this point, I think it's a valid thing to point to why they lost, saying that the big money flooded in. But I think at this point, where we are right now in 2021, that's no longer a valid excuse because we've seen this same strategy play out. Nina Turner lost the same exact way that Bernie Sanders lost in a way, where you had the establishment coalescing, you had dark money, also funded by Israel groups, same thing that went after Bernie, big pharma money, and they blistered the airway with ads. So once again, the strategy isn't new. They have done this before, and based on what I've seen, it seems like the establishment has adjusted to the progressive movement because we have our first squad members that got elected because I really believe that neoliberals believe their dogma. Their dogma was that if you run on progressive ideas, there's no way you can win. No, I think they legitimately believe that. So they underestimated the squad and they won. Now, after those victories, the establishment adjusted and they beta tested strategy against Bernie Sanders and it worked to perfection with Super Tuesday. And then we can have a conversation about election integrity as well, but I think that's still the establishment coalescing and that strategy play a big role. So my question to you is, knowing this, what would have you done differently? What do you think the near-term campaign should have done? And how do the progressive movement even adjust to this new strategy the centrists are doing? Because this is why I'm not accepting the excuses, because if you guys just make excuses instead of adjusting to the reality, we're going to keep losing, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I wasn't a part of Nina Turner's campaign, and so I'm not really sure what decisions were made and why about when they started door knocking, what the ground game was like, how many doors were knocked, what the Shontel Brown was doing, the ability or whether or not they actually, in fact, penetrated a number of churches or other institutions on the ground. Those are questions I think that would be better asked to people who are closer to her campaign and know more about what was actually happening on the ground. And sometimes it takes weeks for that kind of information to start to come out. So I don't want to be in a position where I'm Monday morning quarterbacking and not attributing enough credit to what actually was done, because I do think also it's true that there are important distinctions between what happened to Senator Turner and what happened to Bernie Sanders. Senator Turner did, in fact, win the majority of the Black working class vote, which is something that Bernie Sanders wasn't able to do. And if he had, there is a chance that he actually would have won the election. The demographics of Ohio's 11th are somewhat different than the populace overall. And Senator Turner's relationship to that community is different than Bernie Sanders' relationship to, say, South Carolina. And I think that the possibility of her doing better, as evidenced by the actual numbers and the fact that she only lost by 4,000 votes or so, demonstrate that it was much closer than Bernie's run in some respects. And it's also worth noting that, someone like Cori Bush took 2 bites of the apple before she was actually able to win. And so I don't know that it's entirely true that it's just a matter of the establishment being asleep at the wheel, because they had a very well-documented case and trial run of stopping Cori Bush, but they weren't able to do it her second time around, right? When they obviously knew she was coming. She'd already done it once before. So, all of these things are very different and very circumstantial. What I will say, however, is that there are some broader messaging wins that we have to secure in order to make candidates like Senator Turner and anti-establishment candidates, broadly speaking, less vulnerable to the charge that they are bad because they are anti-establishment. That was the principal argument against her being made in all of those television and radio and ads and pamphlets that were disseminated as a result of the dark money spending in the last couple of weeks. It wasn't about Senator Turner's policy. It wasn't even really about her association with Bernie Sanders, which some people, worried was stigmatizing in a negative way. It was this idea that she was somehow antagonistic to Democrats, and that being a Democrat was to be progressive, and therefore that she was anti-progressive. So there were ads accusing her of not supporting things like a $15 minimum wage and other policies that we all perceive to be very core to the progressive agenda. And so it's almost an admission by the establishment that our platforms are actually good and appealing to people. And it requires a certain amount of capitalizing on folks' big D Democrat brand identification to convince folks that someone like Senator Turner doesn't represent Democratic ideals as the public understands them. And so we need to have, I think, broader conversations about what the Democratic Party should be standing for, and unpacking outside of the context of election cycles, why it is that Democratic politicians so rarely end up embodying the ideals that the party is supposed to hold and holds in the hearts and minds of many of Americans who don't frankly know better. And that's part of why I'm frequently pushing the progressives that are in office to do more of that work, to highlight the contrast between what Democrats will say in terms of rhetoric and what they will actually do and vote for and advocate for. And that's part, of course, of what Force the Vote was all about.
That's well said. Finny, you got anything you want to add before I jump back in?
Yeah, so when I was out here in D.C., I was a part of the Cori Bush protest out here on the Capitol steps. And I spent a lot of time talking to the squad, talking to them about organizing strategy, because I'm an organizer, and that's what I started doing before, the internet stuff. But I just really wanted to dig into how we can organize around our policies and around our principles within a structure that literally does not agree with us, and also throws all of them under the bus whenever they feel like it,
right,
to protect themselves. And how do we build power outside of that establishment to actually challenge that power? And of course, it was all about organizing outside of the government and all those different things. So I guess my question is for you, do you see a path forward in the Democratic establishment? And if not, what is the path forward to building power outside of the Democratic establishment?
Well, I don't know that it's quite an either or, right? I certainly wouldn't put all my hopes and dreams on electoralism at this moment. A lot of people have observed this, and I've obviously been beating this drum for a while, but I saw in the wake of Senator Turner's loss, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, and others point out that if you see the Democratic Party have such an open willingness to undermine a Democratic candidate who had a strong lead in a district that was native to her, a Black woman, all the things that they say that they love, if you see them demonstrate such a willingness to undermine a progressive candidate in that way, then how can you continue to give that party votes and expect them not to continue to do that? If there are never any consequences for the Democratic Party acting against the interests of huge swaths of its own population, then, you're just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that's, insane. So, there is a question about whether or not folks are going to be increasingly willing to threaten to withhold their votes and to demonstrate, not just, obviously work stoppages and such are a part of the equation, but this is the circle that we go around and round again with on my show. And that has caused me a great deal of frustration. We have organizers come on and I ask them, okay, how can we organize to get this done? Like how can people who aren't a part of the labor force or who aren't a part of a unionized workforce, which is the overwhelming majority of us, help support work stoppages and the like that will enable us to extract some concessions during a crisis like the one that we're living through right now? And the answer is typically, I think in good faith, but frustratingly, well, union density is too low and it's just going to take, decades for us to grow it again. And, that's the story. And that's a really unsatisfying explanation, even if it's true for folks who are living in crisis at this moment, especially when there are certain historical precedents of things popping off without that kind of organized labor force being the impetus, right? Thinking of, Paris 68 and even last summer, where there was this groundswell of support and protest. The question is, what are you going to do with all those people in the streets? What is the demand? What is the threat that's being made? And can you ensure that it's being made credibly? Can you start to, instead of raising money, or in addition to, depending on your orientation, raising money for these congressional candidates, also raise money for strike funds? Imagine if there were millions of dollars as have been raised in the context of these campaigns, sitting in funds to help people who are unionized, who are in workforces that I'm not, and you're not a part of, to withhold their labor while having some cushion. Are we going to exploit this looming debt cliff with the student debt moratorium now being extended to the end of January? Are we going to prepare for a moment where we say there are enough of us who aren't going to pay our loans regardless if you ever lift this moratorium? And are there protections that we can create for each other so that people who are going to be hurt by doing something like that as a result because of their credit score or wage garnishes or whatever, have support from those of us who are more able to withstand that storm financially? And I would like to see conversations of that sort that are very specific being had, because of course organizing is going to be at the core of this project, but there are moments when the word organizing gets thrown out in a way that seems to be a way to protect the kind of status quo commitment to electoralism as its only option. It's to put organizing on a pedestal and say, this is what we have to do. We're just not ready to do it yet. And that leaves a lot of people standing around feeling kind of impotent and lost. And I think that's frankly the root of a lot of the bickering and lashing out and ugliness that you see among the online left since the end of the Bernie campaign.
I see the primary divide on the left, according to my calculation, based on the conversations I had, seems to be based on the discussion on how much energy that we should spend on electoral politics and whether we should be loyal to Democrats. Now, I actually have a lot of my friends and a lot of my comrades that outflank me to the left, which is, I think, is a good thing, because my take have been consistent from day one. Why I say I think we should take all our shots, no matter where we can take them. Now, everyone is not in the position to create rallies, to create mutual aid groups. So some people, their only power they have, like if you're in a deep red state surrounded by rednecks, like, are you really going to be able to host left-wing organizations there? You can try, and I think that's a good idea to try. But people who got to take whatever route they personally think is the best for their liberation. Now, if you ask me, like, what's the percent the left should invest in electoral politics? Me personally, I put that number around 10 or 15%. That's just me personally. Now, the divide on the left is that you have a lot of people who are more Democratic Party loyalists who will say a ridiculous number to me. They will say 90%. That's kind of number, whether they will admit it or not. That's how much energy they put towards electoral politics. And the scenario I lay out to people, and this is what's important conversation to have, because unlike the corporate Democrats, we don't have an unlimited amount of funds. So if you are a single mother of 2 kids And let's say you still want to do good for the public, so you set aside $10 a month because you only can afford $10 out of your budget to go to social causes. Do you spend that $10 electing politicians who won't even listen to activists? Or do you donate that money to the mutual aid groups that Finney is running, Tour for the Poor that Rome is running, multiple food banks? Me personally, I'm not donating to any politicians outside of Casey. I'll donate to Casey Tenants. Casey Tenants out of Kansas City is actually preventing people from going homeless. They actually got people homes in the middle of a pandemic. So why would I donate to a politician instead of an organization like Casey Tenants? And meanwhile, the people who hate me, the people who disagree with me, think that take is unreasonable. What's your take on that, Brie?
I think that's a perfectly respectable position. I think that people should give their money to causes that they have confidence in. And I don't judge anybody for having flagging confidence in elected officials. I think that elected officials, a lot of these progressives, are able to fundraise so strongly because lots of people still do have a great deal of confidence in them. But that confidence needs to be continued to earn. It continues to be earned. And unless they feel like their, fundraising is flagging, and their support online and offline is diminishing, then it's difficult to see how they would ever change their behavior to be more responsive to the people. Now, the reality is that these progressive Congress people have much broader reach than the left. Right. At this point, there are a lot of people who I would argue don't even necessarily share our politics that are very fond of these women because, we're a country whose politics, whose populace, the politics of the populace is largely driven by identity politics to date. And they're, charming, dynamic, beautiful women who a lot of people like and will give money to and support regardless. So I don't know how much withdrawing money will actually affect their behavior unless it happens at a much greater scale than I think it has. However, I obviously think that folks, especially folks who don't have a lot to spend, are right to be skeptical and to want to spend their money in ways that seem less attenuated from their real lives. I don't quite understand why that's such a controversial position. If you still have confidence in the squad and electoralism, you absolutely should give money to those causes. My mother is from Cleveland. I don't give money these days. I'm trying to move back into a journalistic space. But, my mother from Cleveland gave lots of money to Senator Nina Turner. I respect that choice. I also wanted Senator Turner to win. Did I also, have, skepticism rooted in the fact that every person who is elected to Congress is under enormous pressure to conform, knowing the reporting about Pramila Jayapal, for example, organizing the squad members to not resist, to not withhold the vote over $15 minimum wage. Of course, every single person, no matter how much I like them and root for them, is going to be subject to those pressures. And we, as non-politicians, our obligation is to exert pressure in the opposite direction so they stay true to their ideological moorings. But, I don't think it's an either or, and I respect everybody's political decisions. And I think that folks who want people to make different political decisions and give to their campaigns, it's incumbent on them to pitch and earn those donations and make commitments about who you're going to be in office at the very least.
You have anything you want to add, Afeni?
I mean, I just feel like, especially because of the class divide alone, when a lot of them get into Congress, like they are no longer standing in solidarity with this class. So their sense of urgency and their priorities change. And like I said, I sat with these women, I talked to them for a really long time. And what I deduced from it, number one, is a lot of the attacks they get are based in racism and sexism. And that can be very traumatic. That could be a lot to handle. And for them to be scared, or for them to feel like, what happened last week was a big win congressionally, sure. For them, that is a big win because the Senate Majority Leader came to them, like that's a big deal for Cori Bush to be a freshman congressperson and a Black woman at that. But in everyday people's lives, materially, that doesn't change anything. People are still getting evicted. People still got evicted. And people that have confidence in the squad are working class people. And I feel like if the squad is not willing to challenge the nucleus of power of this government, which is capital, which is wealth, which is like, war power and all those other things, then how seriously can we take the electoral route when a lot of people are dying? Like a lot of people are dying, and that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, the argument for there being some value to electoralism is that you can't push air, right? There has to be somebody there that is at least pushable, so that outside efforts can have some effect. And I don't think it's controversial to say that it's better for it to be Cori Bush than Lacey Clay, and that it's better for it to be Senator Turner than Shontel Brown. I mean, that's obvious. So the question is how much money and effort and energy and interest should be put into electing those people as opposed to the outside. And I don't think it's not an either or, but it is obvious that the outside effort has been really neglected. And so folks who want to start paying more attention to that, I think, are correct to want to focus there, given how many electoral disappointments we've had as a consequence of not having that outside infrastructure. And to the extent that some of the insiders once positioned themselves very recently as outsiders and said that they were going to use their insider position to help galvanize movements that push their colleagues from the outside. Maybe that was naive to think that they would continue to do that. But even Bernie Sanders, right, argued that he was going to be a kind of an organizer in chief that kept his, organizing mechanism going, and would continue to exert pressure and make demands. We all remember him talking about going to Mitch McConnell's front yard and using local protests to pressure intransigent, senators into doing what their actual constituents want them to do, and all of that. And obviously we haven't seen any of that, even though we're in the biggest financial crisis this country has seen since the Great Depression. I mean, the protests of last summer almost feel like a faint memory at this point. And it was incredible, if you reflect back on it, how much went into ensuring that those millions of people in the street that represented millions of potential votes for Joe Biden were never organized as a voting bloc or politicized in the least. I don't remember lists of concrete demands being put to Joe Biden that says, if you don't do X, Y, and Z from the Black Lives Matter platform, we're going to not vote for Joe Biden. You have to earn our votes. I didn't even see any electoral consequences being raised when he started talking about, you ain't Black if you don't vote for me, and all of that kind of stuff in the middle of all of that. I didn't see any of our Black leadership saying, at very least, we need, Joe Biden to commit to a $15 minimum wage, commit to $2,000 recurring checks, commit to any number of the things that we're now seeing have fallen through the cracks. His immigration behavior has been near identical to Donald Trump, and on and on and on down the line. Things that, by the way, affect Black Americans. What was it? 1 out of every 6 deportees was Haitian at a certain point. I mean, like this is what's going on. And the energy is there. People are willing to be led. But with Obama swooping in to cancel the NBA strike, with all of these people, every single time the same playbook is going to be used. And there is nobody, there's no one who has the credibility as a kind of leader in the Black community at this point, it seems, who isn't captured. The people who do get to stick their head up above the rest and get some kind of visibility and could be in a leadership position almost immediately become captured, and you're seeing them in Chrysler commercials, etc. So, that's not, I don't mean that as like a personal attack, but, in a world where living in capitalism, where so many people are precarious or they perceive precarity, and it's just too easy for people to get bought off, and no one is genuinely independent. And people are starting to notice, but not enough, with enough alacrity to actually make the most of the crisis that we're in, to do shock doctrine for good for once, you know? And I think, again, that's why everyone's so antsy. That's why there's so much tension. But the tension should be channeled toward figuring out how to organize and channel all of the anger that I see every time I go into the Shade Room comment section and people are like, F this, where's my STEMI? Where's my $2,000 checks? Where's my student loan cancellation? Those people need to be channeled toward a political path that can get them power and results, as opposed to some Black capitalism where we're going to go and buy Tracy Ellis's Ross's, you know, natural hair product or whatever. Love Tracy. She's got great hair, but like, that's like not the point. You know what I mean? And that's that you can see the fractures, but is anyone to stand up and actually lead in this moment?
That's very well said. And I think the path, especially among Black leftists, and I just hope everyone will stand in solidarity with us, is to call out these Black oligarchs, because I wrote in great detail how much damage Black capitalism, the Black community embracing Barack Obama while rejecting their socialist roots has done to our community.
Yeah.
And this kind of relates to legitimate issues of the squad that you laid out during your spill there, where there seems to be some issues they are willing to let slip through the cracks. And the reason why we are called divisive, the Black leftists, is we call them out for not supporting openly and fighting for reparations. We call them out because they was complicit in making giving the Capitol Police more money. Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman was complicit in funding Israel more. So when you are supportive of the squad, when they are doing stuff like that, my question to you is, why is it okay to leave these people behind? So what I see out of the squad and what I see out of the progressive politics right now, where it's the focus is more on the suburbanite class and what will kind of help them. And I'm a strong supporter of a lot of the progressive ideas, because I think if you uplift the Black community, that will uplift all boats. So things like Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, these things will 100% help the Black community the most. And that's why I think Black people should advocate for them. But you see, there's kind of a focus on some of these things. And the funny thing is, now I'm thinking about it, they don't even fight on these things. Like Medicare for all. So they don't even talk. Now I think about it, they don't even fight on these things. But that's that point aside. These people are willing to fight and die for these issues, but when it comes to Black issues, when it comes to ICE, when it comes to bombing Syria, like when these things are not mentioned at all, when it comes to the crackdown of free speech, these things are not mentioned at all by the squad. And this is this is why this is so painful. I'll pass it right back to you, Bree. The reason why this is so harmful for the left is because the squad is not shifting the dialogue in the country to the left. They are dragging what it means to be a socialist to the right. So what I mean by that is that you have people who support AOC, you have people who support the squad, who I've seen smear Julian Assange and their supporters, for example. Now, why do they do that? They do that because Bernie Sanders and the squad is weak on those issues. So in order to cover for them, they got to make Assange supporters seem unhinged. That's just one example. These people smear us and attack us as tankies because we call out U.S. imperialism. Do you see how the squad is allowing the Overton window to shift only a certain point to the left? That's the problem. I want to get your take on that, Bria. I went long.
No, I think that's right. And some version of each of those individuals would have agreed with you at some point in their political trajectory and said, hold my feet to the fire, keep me honest. You know, there's some moments that have happened in the trajectory of these individuals that have made me think, oh, this was just born out of like ignorance. People are young and new and haven't really thought through their positions yet, and they'll figure it out. But at this point, you know, a real eye-opening moment for me was that interview that AOC did on Deconstructed with Jeremy Scahill in January, I believe, where he asked her about force the vote, and that got most of the attention. Her answer on that, which many found unsatisfying. But also he asked her about Julian Assange. And, you know, Jeremy Scahill is someone for whom that's his beat. You know, he's like the surveillance king, and that's kind of the Intercept's beat. And I was really surprised when she gave a kind of non-answer, like, oh, I don't really know about Assange. And he didn't press her on it at all. And, you know, that stuff absolutely matters, because I know, as someone whose politics developed significantly between 2016, 2015, and now, having Bernie there saying things and kind of establishing the bounds of the possible and the credible was really instrumental in me testing the waters and researching and figuring out what my own politics should be. And it feels like we're definitely retreating from even that, which was a fairly middle ground political position that he made feel safe for so many millions of Americans over the course of the last 5 years or so. And a lot of these newer squad members have the affect, people have the impression that they're even more radical than Bernie, rightly or wrongly. And so if they shrink the boundaries of what is considered to be credible, then that is more dangerous in some ways. Now, I don't know how much they have retracted from certain kinds of positions and how much they're frankly very rarely asked about them, because the mainstream media isn't interested in asking anybody about Julian Assange at any point. They certainly weren't hardly interested in asking anyone about Andrew Cuomo's harassment until there was a tipping point where they couldn't ignore it anymore, right? Like the bar is extremely low. And I do think this is where left media plays an important role in keeping people aware of where the conversation should be, and ideally would be able to be in direct conversation with progressives in Congress, including Bernie Sanders, about their thinking on these issues and how they're defending their positions. Unfortunately, unlike right-wing media, there isn't there doesn't seem to be much of an interest in left-wing figures kind of growing and supporting an independent left media, which could ultimately come to their defense when they are getting railroaded by the establishment, including the Democratic Party establishment. The Republicans understand that there's some strength in having these independent media outlets where that they grow and foster and develop, and they go on to lend credibility that can then be an infrastructure to get what they consider to be the real news out into the world when the corporate news won't satisfy. Obviously, I think their news isn't good and real, but on the left, it's a really interesting dynamic to be kind of called upon to defend squad members and defend progressives who aren't really interested in engaging with the media except to have them at their backs. And it's not about, some people characterize that relationship as, oh, you just want them to come on your show. No, that's not it. But if you have a response to the critique that's coming from left media, you should make it. Like, I want to know if there is an alternative plan to forcing the vote in any number of these issues. If you have a game plan, come and talk to us and let us know. If there is something strategically that you're cooking that you want activist support around to push from the outside, come and give that signal nod so that we can be helpful and supportive. But when there is this like black box of information, and the progressives are having the same weight and trust as attitude that has led us into multiple generations of destitution for many communities, including my own, then of course there's going to be skepticism. Of course there's going to be a degree of paranoia. Of course there's going to be, frustrations that bubble over and have the effect of not extending the same kind of protection to left politicians that the right gets from its independent media infrastructure. And there's a cause and effect here. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's obvious what's happening. And I think it would behoove progressives to have a much better relationship with a non-corporate media ecosystem for their own benefit.
Well said. Fitney, you want to add anything?
I just wanted to say, as an activist, it's very frustrating to organize around these ideas, especially on my local level, and to organize around these candidates. When they do run for re-election, a lot of us are donating. A lot of us, at least here in DC, we're posting about their re-election campaigns and how to support them out here. So to organize around these ideas and then go and talk to them and say hey, y'all have email lists, if we want to do like a national tent city and reach all of your constituents at once, or all the people that have ever donated to you at one time, to put out the word for this, to say, occupy every city hall and every single Democrat's district that went home. And that's what we should do. And they kept saying, oh, we don't know everybody that went home. You know who the fuck went home. Like, you know, like, these are your colleagues. Like, you know who went home. So why are we not strategizing around that? And then they said, like, oh yeah, you know what? Start strategizing around that. Start reaching out to orgs. So I started reaching out to orgs. Like, I'm like, okay, like, let's escalate this action, because number one, your asses were too weak in the first place. Your asses were too weak in the first place. We should have started at rent cancellation. Mm-hmm. Like, starting at extending the eviction moratorium when people are still going to be in debt in 2 months really does not help a whole lot. And so what was all the methodology behind that? And then it was, oh, well, we introduced, I think Ilhan Omar introduced a bill back in March, but no movement was made around it. And you did not mobilize your constituency around it. You guys have email lists. So it's just like, use them. Like, I'm an organizer. And we use email lists all the time, text banks all the time for all different types of things. Like, you have the outreach power. They're just not using it. And that's what's the most frustrating thing.
I completely agree. There's a lot of folks who want to say they want to have it both ways. ASD and the squad members aren't powerful, but also they're be all end all. Like, which is it? Is Twitter real life or not? Because I do know that they have millions of followers, that they have these enormous email lists, that they have an ability, despite a lot of corporate blackout that happens, to get on the air in a way that almost no other progressive does, right? They have a certain magical quality around them that has obviously captured the imaginations of millions of Americans, and to not deploy that in this crisis does start to feel extremely negligent. And it feels like when I talk to people, because look, I've come to these positions not kind of hubristically. I'm relatively new to politics, and I've been engaging on my show in the project of talking to people who are much more expert than I, and just asking them questions that from an outsider seem to be kind of obvious. And as I've gotten unsatisfying answers, that's when I've gotten more confident in saying, well, you guys really should be doing X, Y, and Z, because your current plan of attack just on its face makes no sense. And the not using the email lists, the not using the text lists, the not sharing that with activists, it starts to feel beyond negligent, like culpably negligent. Do you know what I mean? And people who will defend the squad, I mean, what it starts to feel like to me is that everyone's a little bit afraid of failure. That the idea that one might protest and not have some concrete result, that it might take a few times, that it might take a few years, is really what's holding people back. They're so concerned, they're so afraid of the narrative that a progressive won and lost, and that means that people don't like progressives. I mean, what does that mean? You're never going to run another progressive because the corporate media is going to predictably take every progressive failure as an indictment of the progressive agenda, no matter what polls show or how desperate and deprived people are? Are you going to not ever have a million man march because it didn't automatically might not automatically result in what you were advocating for? Are we never going to withhold the vote because it's not going to magically manifest the next day in legislation that passes? Are we not going to look to these historical examples like the fight for suffrage, which took vote after vote after voting round to finally come through? Are we not going to look at the fact that the civil rights movement is a movement that extended back into the late 19th century and the Pullman Porter strikes of the early part of the 20th century, and pretend that somebody woke up one day in 1965 and made it all happen? The lack of kind of historical context, the fear of looking like a loser. I mean, frankly, it's the most guaranteed way you're going to actually be a loser. And I need the left to have a little bit more confidence in itself and the people that constitute its base. Because for all of the pom-pom waving about how we have the numbers and the polls are on our side and we have this multiracial coalition and all we need is for the people to believe, and it's, they've got money, we've got people. No one acts like it. No one behaves like it. And you see this down to the messaging as well. I mean, it's difficult when you're in the middle of a campaign and it's a risky proposition. But there is a question as to whether or not leaning into voting for Biden's a half a bowl of shit because this is the man who wrote the crime bill would have actually been a better turn than kind of playing along. And I don't know the answer to that. That's not Monday morning quarterbacking, but I think it's a question that progressives have to start asking, because my experience on the ground in Cleveland was that we were at a polling site with Chantel Brown's uncle, and one of the organizers, Ms. Martiche Chisholm, started talking to him about Biden's history, and he was like, oh my God, I didn't know about any of that. And he seemed like 10 minutes away from ripping off his Chantel Brown shirt and crossing lines, right? And so it's not about being antagonistic, but it's about the fact that not running away from the critique of you from being anti-establishment is an opportunity to inform people about why it is you are anti-establishment instead of looking like you're guilty and running for something. And at a certain point, I think progressives have to take a more oppositional, aggressive approach to politics, because it is in fact true that the numbers are on our side and the people are on our side, but there is a real information gap that exists that is perpetuated by a captured media. It's perpetuated by progressives who won't help to build up an alternative media base, and it's perpetuated by individual politicians who don't behave in ways that demonstrate that they actually trust the communities that they serve.
So much to unpack there, and I love that you guys brought this up, because I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I understand the validity of the inside-outside game. It makes sense to me on paper. The problem is the inside game, the progressive inside game, despises the progressive outside game, the leftist outside game. They view us as deplorables, and people wonder why I'm upset. So why didn't they attend or show up to the Medicare for All marches? You had people that were close to Nina that was even open about it. We can't be seen with these activists because it was controversial. What? These are your supporters, and you calling them controversial? What? You calling them deplorable, essentially. You are saying that you cannot be seen in public with the same people you claim you are fighting for. So I see the validity of the inside-outside game. The problem is this strategy doesn't even come close to working unless you have an inside game that is complicit and fights with the outside game. And people wonder why things like Force the Vote was such a big deal, because that was one of the biggest examples of them just outright rejecting the outside game, outright rejecting it. And you brought up some arguments that debunked their nonsense. And I honestly 100% went to that debate with open mind. Well, I heard both sides out, and then as things continued to go on, one side was continuing to look ridiculous, and as you said yourself, Bree, ahistorical. So this is why I think this conversation is important, because I think that was a really revealing moment on the split of the left.
Well, so, let me ask you this. I'm open to that. Let me ask you this: when you say you reject the inside game, does that mean entirely? Does that mean that you would not want like a Senator Turner to win, or you would prefer like a Lacey Clay?
Let me clear this up, because there's a lot of people that got misconceptions on this. And once again, I'm not flanked on the left for my friends all the time. I said I wanted Turner to win. I said I even said, and I remember a lot of my communist friends really went after me when I said this. If Cori Bush, I live in Missouri, if Cori Bush runs against Josh Hawley, I'm 100% supporting Cori Bush. I will canvass, because I have a ton of criticism of Bernie Sanders, ton of criticism of the squad. But I started off as a citizen journalist because I quit my job and I went in South Carolina to talk to Black people about Bernie Sanders. Now, that's a whole nother conversation we're going to have here soon. Now, the reason why I did that, because I knew like this is a giant moment. And even though I got a lot of criticisms of Bernie, this is something that has to happen. Now, if you ask me if I regret that, even with all my criticism of Bernie Sanders and seeing how he pretty much a sheepdog that Chris Hedges was 100% right about, by the way, I still wouldn't have taken back. You know why? Because electoral politics is a tool you can use to radicalize your community. Right. Do you guys have any idea how many Black people are turned to leftists throughout the course of the 5 years of the Bernie Sanders campaign? That's why I went to South Carolina, and a lot of people who follow my story, I was sent down there because I was like, guys, I've run out of black people here to convert to leftists. And that's to me, when I said 15% of our energy towards electoral politics, that's what I'm talking about. Now, if Cori Bush ran against Josh Hawley, even though I think Cori Bush is spineless at the end of the day, and I got a lot of criticism of the squad, that's a fight I will still jump in because there's a lot of left arguments that we can make to our community using that race as a guise. So that's, I know a lot of people ask me that, like, do you regret? Because I made a lot of sacrifices.
So I'm not asking you. I assume that would be your answer, and so I ask you that not, to challenge you, and I agree with you, but I do think that sometimes, I don't want, one opens themselves up to a bad faith attack if we frame if we say things like, I don't believe in an inside-outside strategy, because what you're saying, what you just described, is understanding the value of there being insiders. Having these campaigns, running these campaigns for these people is an opportunity to radicalize folks for the longer game. Like, that's the argument you just made, which is part of an inside strategy. So it sounds like we both agree that both are necessary, but, your emphasis is on an outside strategy because that's what's being neglected right now. And I completely support that. And I think that that's a correct assessment of where the energies are right now and what needs more support and more help. But I do think that there are people who will hear, I don't believe in the inside game, which is what you're really saying is an articulation of frustration with how insiders are not pulling their weight, frankly, as I'm going to work against progressive politicians or be indifferent to whether or not they get elected, which is not actually, I think, what your position is.
Yeah, and that's why our work is so important, because I'm trying to push these people to be better. Now, if I completely didn't understand or care about the inside game, I wouldn't talk about these issues at all, because I wouldn't see the value even talking about that. Now, my criticism of the inside-outside game as it presented by a lot of our more moderate friends on the left is they are seen to be 100% okay with the inside game as it is right now. Now, there can be a legitimate, and I still want to see a real leftist get elected. Because I talk about this with Max Blumenthal, I have legitimate criticisms of the squad and Bernie Sanders recently as leftist leaders. I just believe they can do better. I believe that we could elect people who can do better. So that's why I led with the beginning. I said, I see the validity of the inside. Because if we had a true leftist at doing what we wanted them to do, that could work. Like, imagine if we had someone with the reach and the influence of Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, who instead of resisting our movement was propping up Force to Vote, was propping up the Medicare fraud marches, was tweeting about that, was tweeting about general strikes, tweeting about all this stuff. Like, the power they have is straight up could be unlimited. Now, it's funny how when the Cori Bush thing, when she got the victim moratorium extended, there was people who was sympathetic to the squad, who fight against my politics, who somehow thought that was a win on their behalf. And I thought that was very interesting, because I'm like, do you understand that whole episode proves us right?
Right.
Like, this is what we've been asking them to do. So my criticism there, because they was like, oh, you still not happy? No, because I got no reason to. Why would I be happy? So my criticism now, after seeing that, why aren't you shutting stuff down when Joe Biden spans ICE? Why aren't you shutting stuff down when he funds the cops more? Why aren't you shutting stuff down when he gave Israel a weapons deal and they continue to fund the genocidal state in Palestine? Those issues are not a big deal for you? Now, homelessness is a big issue. I care a lot about that issue. But why is that the line to stand, but all these other crimes against humanity not?
Depending on how cynical you want to be in any given moment, there's answers to that, right? Like, one of an analytical lines that I always look to is this permanent? Because there's an enormous appetite for things that look progressive but aren't permanent. So you'll see people want to do a moratorium extension. You'll see the corporate elites be willing to give a check that's not recurring. You'll see them have a willingness to do child tax credits that may end up being permanent but aren't yet. You'll see a certain willing to do all kinds of things that are temporary in nature. And you'll get a lot of headlines and fanfare about it. Oh, look, we cut child poverty in half or whatever it was, with the full knowledge that that's going to lapse. And the inverse headline, Democrats vote to double child poverty, is never going to be on the front page of the Times. I'm sorry?
Can I jump in 1 second? I just want to add one thing because you mentioned the poverty that Democrats was bragging about, and this kind of ties into my criticism of them as leftist leaders. Because what I was tweeting out at the time is, if you are a leftist, if you are anti-capitalist, there is at no point in your existence should you ever give legitimacy behind U.S. capitalist rates. Do you guys understand that under U.S. capitalist rates, a single mother of 2 kids that makes over $22,000 a year, they consider to be out of poverty? So as a leftist, instead of propping that up, which I seen the squad do, I saw Bernie like, yo, Joe Biden's about to reduce poverty. Why are you even giving validity to that talking point? As anti-capitalists and anti-socialists are responsibly F off, because you're not. The capitalist poverty rates are a joke. But so I'll pass it back to you. I just want to add that point.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that should have been the start of a conversation about how ridiculous our poverty metrics are. That could have been a whole media cycle about how we haven't changed them since the 1960s, and profiles of what it's actually like to live on $20,000 a year, and all of that would have been enormously beneficial. And frankly, I think enough in line with the neoliberal, like with the values of the neoliberal journalistic class, that you could have gotten a lot of people interested in that story who don't necessarily share our left politics. You know, the Ta-Nehisi Coateses and, you know, Van Newkirks and Jelani Cobbs of the world, I think will happily write a story about how, you know, Black people are deserved by the poverty line metrics that exist today. And it would have at least had the benefit of advancing the conversation and putting political pressure on folks who would use those metrics to invisibilize how bad things are for so many people. But we don't even get that. Like, we don't,
and well, then, that's why I'm gonna get you in here, Finney. But that's why I said, and that's why me and Max talk about, that's the criticism we have of them as leftist leaders. Like, as a leftist leader, you should want to start these public debates. That's how you win. And I think one of my takes is, I think one of the reasons why you have people voting for people like Chantel Brown over Nina Turner, because they legitimately, like you said earlier, with when you guys were talking to that guy who liked Joe Biden and he learned who he was.
That was Chantel Brown's uncle, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I missed that detail. So they don't even see a difference between you and Chantel, Nina and Chantel. Now, there's a lot of criticisms that you can lay at the media for why that is, but also because you guys are not forcing the debates that would make this clear and obvious, and that would force a vote would have done, right?
Yeah, like look at this. Like, remember how Bernie wanted a poverty debate? Like, one of the presidential debates to be on poverty. Obviously, they didn't want that, and also there were these rules that if you had a separate debate, then you weren't going to be allowed to come to the next general debate, because America. So no one's running for president anymore. Why haven't Bernie and squad members sat down? Let's say they hosted a debate on poverty in Ohio 3 months ago, you know, in advance of this election, that had a focus on issues in Ohio, a purple state. The Democratic Party should be very invested in educating Ohioans about how their conservative government has undermined the interests of the people who live in the state. Ohio is a purple state. It's a racially mixed state. Obviously, big cities are heavily Black, but it's also got those rural southern stretches. It is a state that is racked by opioid addiction. My aunt in Cleveland works with this enormous population of people who are wrestling with this. You know, there are so many issues that you could start to galvanize people around that would inure to the Democratic Party's benefit in a general election, not to mention, obviously, Nina Turner. But you see a complete lack of interest or ability potentially in doing that. And if you say to me, okay, CNN, MSNBC, they won't host the debate on poverty, even if they are obviously flagging with respect to numbers and views. All right, let's figure out how we can get eyes on this and the alternative. Let's say, and people joke or they think I'm being a little silly when I talk about celebrities in this way. And I appreciate that, but I bring up celebrities out of a kind of a desperation. If you're not going to get the mainstream media to support you, you're going to have to use alternative means. And if you have someone like Cardi B or Ariana Grande who have more daily viewers than a CNN and who can live stream a debate to their Instagram channels or their Twitter channels, people who have demonstrated his support for Bernie Sanders and who love young, shiny folks like AOC, link together with them and see if you can get someone else to host the debate. Will BET host the debate? Will Vice host the debate? Get it out there and stream it across all of the channels. Get all the young people in Ohio who are on their phone to start getting clued into these issues and being educated more broadly outside of the context of even this one electoral contest. You know, invite Chantel Brown and Nina Turner to come talk at the debate, because, oh my God, if anybody had ever heard Chantel Brown speak, it would have been a no-brainer. You know, like, so why aren't I've said this before and I'll say it again. I am not some comms expert. I'm new to this entire genre, but it feels like no one's doing comms for the left. And I felt like this in the context of the Bernie campaign and more broadly, that there are very obvious ideas that no one is even experimenting with. We live in a day where you don't have to wait for Walter Cronkite to bring up your issue on one of the 3 news channels. There's a million options. Most people are getting their news from YouTube anyway. And instead of embracing that fact, Democrats are too busy running around screaming like chickens with their heads cut off about how that's going to be the rise of fascism without competing in the trenches. All the creatives, all the Hollywood, all the stuff that's supposed to be on the side of the left, all of these liberals, all of these Californians that are supposed to be winning the culture war for us, can't put together some pithy YouTube videos and resources to push forth the fight on these basic fundamental issues during, and I cannot say this enough, the biggest economic crisis since the Great Recession, where 15 million people lost their employer-based healthcare last year.
If any, what do you want to add?
So, you know, I just wanted to say, like, to your point, Bri, like, at the Capitol, there was no comm strategy. It was a constant conversation on the ground. Like, so what are we going to do to actually, like, get some better messaging around this? Like, what's the strategy? And there was never really an answer. You know what I'm saying? So I really just wanted to add that, like, say that there is a problem with messaging on the left. And one thing that I can say about the right that they have down packed is their messaging and their raw meat to their base. Yep. And the left does not do that. And, you know, a lot of the issues that I also see on the left is they don't make these issues like widely applicable to Black people. Mm-hmm. And one, like, a problem that I had with the Bernie Sanders campaign was there were so many ways that you can intersect working class issues with Black people and with Blackness that just did not happen. You know, on a plethora of issues, like, you know, Black women die 3 times more on maternity tables than white women do. That's just for Medicare for all. We should have anti-racist universal health care. Like, this needs to be
believe you me, the op-eds that I wrote, and some of them got published, about how, you know, it is a true fact that one of the biggest drivers of the maternal mortality gap is that Black women are disproportionately on Medicaid and get worse service as a consequence of having a tiered healthcare system. Have to go to lower income hospitals, are treated as second class citizens. Homelessness and having to move houses a lot during pregnancy and changing primary care providers is another huge driver, and the stresses of poverty. Talking about maternal mortality rate during the election became the thing to say to prove that you were talking to Black people by all of the kind of more woke intersectional candidates like Elizabeth Warren. However, nothing that they were offering would cure the problem. Elizabeth Warren, her great big plan was to penalize hospitals that had higher maternal health rates by defunding them. So the already struggling poor hospitals that are servicing Black communities, let's take funding from them and make it even more difficult for them to deliver care. Bernie's solution, increase the amount of funding that people get through Medicare and make Medicare for all. Do you know what I mean? But simple things like that, like, hey, actually, did you know that Medicare for all is one of the best things you can do to close the maternal mortality gap? It was extremely difficult to get into campaign messaging or to get to come out of Bernie's mouth. That's just the reality of having an older candidate who is very kind of stuck in his messaging. But there's no excuse for a Cori Bush or any of these young facile people who know the issues.
Elizabeth Warren, the queen of bad ideas. I'll pass it right back to you, Finney, but I actually forgot all about that. That's hilarious. That reminds me of when Elizabeth Warren was like, yo, we gotta fight climate change by making green military. Like green military, like what? Anyway, back to Finney. Like, she was so bad. I can't believe people didn't fell for that. Anyway, Finney, it's on you.
I mean, no, I'm just saying, like, and the U.S. also has like the highest infant mortality rate as well, of any well-developed country. So, like, just linking those issues and talking about those different things, talking about the wealth gap, and really having a conversation about like how working class Black people are they are struggling because we are 2 generations removed, if you're an African American descendant of a slave, from abject poverty. And that's just the reality of the situation. And it's not to say that Black people are victims, not to say that Black people are like, whatever, but that's just the case. On top of all of the structural and, systematic ways that we are discriminated against financially and what have you, just really starting, like really focusing on problems from that lens, or even like awakening an anti-war crowd that Obama kind of killed, awakening the anti-war crowd by saying like, the reason why the military, is funded the way it is because we go and target poor Black and brown kids in these working class communities and working class white people to go die in these wars that we spend billions of dollars on. Like, this needs to be something that we're talking about. Like, I'm an anti-war veteran. I know that I joined the military because I needed resources. And that same like socialism that we are trying to depend on is something that you find within the military. So it's just like, if you can offer it, if I'm going to like die, and if you can let the Pentagon lose $35 trillion and you have no consequences, then you can definitely afford to fund these repairs to the Black community. You can definitely afford to give everybody housing and give everyone healthcare in this country.
Yeah. That's a really powerful argument. I mean, you should come on. I was just thinking about actually doing a kind of an anti-intervention episode with this guy that we had on Hear the Burn at one point, Kyle Bibby, who's with Common Defense. And you should join. We should do a little panel on it.
I want that. We have to have that. We have to have that. That would be amazing. We gotta do that, Finny.
Sure.
You definitely gotta do that. I have I still want to talk about the Glenn Lowry debate, but I had one more thing. I had one more thing I want to add because I think this kind of ultimately ties into this. I also want to address a few things you said because there's so many points that you made there that I've been kind of preaching, and I find it funny. And I've seen people criticize you. I've seen people criticize Jimmy Dore. I've seen a lot of people get criticized because we wonder why they don't actually use independent establishment media. And they be like, "Oh, you just mad at Bernie? You don't want to go on your podcast? You short-sighted." Like, do you understand what that would mean? Like, so what I mean here, the fact that, and one thing, I got a lot of criticism of Cal or whatever, but the fact that Bernie Sanders went on Cal Coalescing's show, one of the biggest left shows on YouTube, only one time in 2 elections, that's election malpractice. Like, I'm sorry, that's straight up election malpractice. Now, the reason why I say this is because you can generate headlines. Once again, I'll bring this point up because you mentioned the point out, you can drive debates on these important issues. Now, the media won't cover that. The media won't ask you these substantive questions. But imagine this. Now, use your imagination. Imagine if we had Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the squad going on the independent media shows and making these arguments. Or you think the corporate media, you think they're going to just ignore that?
Nick, my friend, I ran the Bernie Sanders podcast for the campaign. Nothing that went on that podcast went out without being vetted by the campaign and ostensibly Bernie himself. It was a complete safe space for Bernie to say anything that he wanted, to introduce any new legislation he had planned, any new policy that he had planned for his campaign, to break news. It was an opportunity for him to have open, casual conversations about difficult subjects like race with, I don't know, your Black National Press Secretary. And really, if you mess up, if you say something untoward, I'll take care of it, Bernie. Let's talk that through and do another take. It was truly a safe space for him to do all of those things. And that's what I was really hoping this would be. And Bernie had the biggest social media reach by far of any candidate in the race. And that there was never that kind of understanding that he could use his own media infrastructure that way. And if he wasn't really willing to use his own media infrastructure that way, I'm not holding out a lot of hope that there's an understanding that he could be using the rest of the progressive media infrastructure that way. Now, I don't know what the excuse is for some of these other progressives out there.
Well said. Now, I want to pivot here because we kind of talking about the squad, and I brought up one of my issues is the fact that we are not having Black issues discussed enough. Now, I watched your debate with Glenn Lowry, right? So, and I think he calls himself a center right kind of guy. But from my perspective, he's far right. But I don't want to misrepresent what he is. Now, I found your conversation interesting for a number of reasons. But before I dive into it, do you just want to give an overview for people who maybe have not watched it, or maybe just get an intro before we get into that, Bree, about what that conversation was about and what argument that you was making?
Sure. So, Glenn Lowry is one of, I think a handful of Black conservatives that are really kind of foundational on the right for making arguments about the culture, Black American culture, being foundational to racial disparities as opposed to historical harms. And I think what's interesting about Glenn and some of these other Black folks who make this argument is that there is less of the, kind of open racism, for lack of a better word, that the open, like, Black people are just defective and inferior, and the IQ discourse and all of that. There's a little less of that and more of a, I really love Black people. I came from this background. I've seen the culture of poverty, as it were, up close, and I want better for us. And we have to help ourselves before we help other people. And I don't want to mischaracterize him. He was very generous in coming to debate with me. And I thought it was a good faith debate. So people should go and listen to it or watch it, however they prefer to consume it on their own, and take his argument for what it is. But what I found to be really interesting about it was the extent to which we both have a critique of a kind of emphasis on, for lack of a better word, woke cultural explanations for disparities. But from my perspective, the focus on, there was an overlap between what liberals do, which is to say, this kind of HR style racism, like, the kind of issues that Rob and D'Angelo will focus on that really just arise in kind of corporate environments are the be all end all. Like, oh, you touched my hair. Like, that's where the racial discourse is centered. And on the right, it's the kind of Black culture discourse. That's where it's centered. And both are basically using these, cultural lightning rods to avoid doing the thing that has a demonstrated impact in closing racial wealth gaps and creating basically social safety net for suffering people, which is policy. Just do the policy, do the policy, do the policy. And so what I was trying to kind of convince Professor Lowry of was that even if he's right, let's just say for the sake of argument that there's a Black culture is bad and that's why everything is bad that happened to Black people. What you going to do about it? Because people have been sitting around saying Black people are bad and you're just culturally deficient and it's all your fault, literally since the day we touched the shores of America. So, and Black people, frankly, have really internalized that. When I was at the mega church with Senator Turner and Shontel Brown and Jim Clyburn and the whole lot, last Sunday morning before the election, the guest sermon was entirely about personal responsibility, and these Black people ate it up. They loved it. It was all about personal responsibility. All I hear about is personal responsibility. Black parents are telling their kids to pull up their pants. Black parents are telling kids to take their hoodies off and be respectful to the police out of a sense of survival. That's already happening. Moreover, there was a way, extent to which he was, I think, ignoring certain statistics that demonstrate that there's an enormous value in education in the Black community. Black women get master's, professional degree, advanced degrees at a higher rate than any other group in this country, in part because we're told so much that everything is your fault. And if you just get an education, the world will open to you. But the consequence of that has only been that Black women have more student debt than everybody else, because there's actually institutional barriers here to getting an education. And it was never about that to begin with. White people were not on top because they were all getting, master's degrees from Columbia. That has never been what created white wealth in America, right? So it was really, I think, productive to talk through some of those things in a way that wasn't so adversarial and aggressive, and that I think we both really, came to each other as human beings and presuming that we believed what we were saying and weren't speaking for white people or acting in bad faith or some of the other charges that get leveraged in these conversations. And I think it was good.
Yeah, I greatly enjoyed that debate. I want to pass it to Fanny. I want to get your thoughts on the debate. I know you had a lot to say, and then I will chime in because, man, that debate was something to get through. And my thing is, I love like your composure, and I mean, you just kind of beat them down with facts as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I'll get my thoughts after Fanny. Fanny, what was your thoughts on the debate they had in Black conservative mindset versus the mindset of Black leftists like us?
So, I mean, I guess for me as an organizer, I understand the personal responsibility thing, but I understand the personal responsibility to your community, to take care of your community, to be a community member, to be in community trust with your community. You see what I'm saying? Like, and to ignore the systematic, and structural issues of this country that have kept Black people from being wealthy, that have kept Black people and like in these red line communities, that have kept Black people more unhealthy, that have kept Black people like more uneducated. All these things, these are things that happen for a reason. And like Bree said, like, white people are not on top because they have more degrees. Like, they're on top because this is how they've structurally built the system, so that way white supremacy, violence, and genocide will continue in this country. And that's just what it is. So, just some home ownership, just a little bit of, just to talk about the wealth gap real quick. 73% of white people own their homes. 45% of Black people own their homes. For every $100 that a white person has in this country, Black people have 13, according to the Association of Psychological Science. $13. So you're telling me right now that Black people we just don't want money? We're not exceptional?
I think you gotta use those $13 and start your own business. Why haven't you started your own business yet?
Like, what? You're telling me my mom has multiple degrees and she also has multiple jobs. Period. My mom she's not, doing anything except trying to make it whatever spot in this American dream that she can have, and that's what a lot of Black people have been sold. But there are so many Black people that do not overcome the obstacles that are put in front of them in this country, and if your argument for Black people is to forget about the fact that all these things have happened, to forget about, all of the irreparable harms since slavery, Jim Crow, white supremacist violence, racial violence. You have, the housing discrimination. You have infrastructural racism. If you're telling us to ignore all of these things and just pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, then you are automatically deeply unserious to me when you say that you care about Black people, because it's unfair for you to victimize or to tell people that they're Black people that they're acting like victims when it is statistically proven that this system is built against us, and that slavery is still very much real in this country, and that a lot of Black people are a part of that system. Period.
Yeah. The utility, the function of the bootstrap narrative, like, and I believe sincerely that Glenn Loury, I think, was arguing in good faith. I think that he truly believes that there is a benefit to be had by Black people looking inward and kind of resolving some cultural issues as a community. However, what was really interesting to me is, his formulation was that we've been throwing money at the problem, those are his words, at forever, and it hasn't had a result, which I would contest. I don't think we've been meaningfully throwing money at anything because the whole point is that we don't actually get the policies that the rest of the world has that create enormous amounts of equality. But even if I concede at that point, we've also been telling people to pull up their bootstraps forever, and that hasn't resulted in anything. And I think one of the most interesting parts of the conversation is being like, look, truly, the bootstrap narrative is everywhere, and Black people use it on other Black people more than anybody else. Like, we have completely drunk the Kool-Aid on that. It's, Bill Cosby is Bill Cosby for a reason. And especially in the 80s, my mother, graduated college in the early 80s and talks about how just oppressive the environment was, how all of the narrow window of affirmative action and post-Civil War policies was shut in the face. And there was this enormous pressure to go work at a bank and buy a Beamer, and all of the revolutionary potential of her childhood was just poof, gone, vanished. And she was a weirdo for not wanting to live that kind of life and just climb. And I don't know, some people on the right and some people on the left, like my former colleague Zed Jelani, there is this feeling, this kind of intellectual dark web feeling that, Black people aren't willing to talk about personal responsibility. They're not willing to talk about Black on Black crime. They're not willing to talk about the things that they have control over, the things that make them look bad optically. And there's a lot of pushback on the left that says that's not true. I think there's a little truth in that. Not because there's an unwillingness to recognize it kind of in our own house, but because we know how those narratives are weaponized against doing any social programs that are actually going to get to the root problem of these things, right? But sometimes I think because that's the case, there's an enormous amount of power just to saying, okay, I'll agree. I'll agree to a policy platform that says every Black person gets mailed a pamphlet about how to pull up their bootstraps and pull up their pants, if you also give them a $15 minimum wage and universal health care. I'm happy. Go literally hire Bill Cosby. He's out to make a bunch of videos telling Black people to do better. And you can spend some sliver of tax dollars disseminating that. Go for it. No skin off my back. Doesn't hurt me at all. If you also do the thing that I want you to do, which is to actually fix the problem through policy. And then you find that folks don't really have much to say back to you. Right? Like, what are they going to say back to you? And that's why I found the debate to be kind of revealing, because I think there's some power in just not conceding to some arguments, but to just like saying, okay, like let me just, for the sake of argument, concede that point, and let's see where that leads us, practically speaking, in terms of uplifting our community or whatever particular rights community we're talking about in that moment.
Well said. And I found this conversation to be very interesting, because I think this conversation need to be had amongst the Black community way more, because all of us growing up heard the same nonsense. And you mentioned it before, the Bill Cosby nonsense. And once again, I wrote my very first op-ed was Embrace MLK, Reject Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. Now, this ever since, I mean, we had revolutionary leaders who rejected capitalism. I mean, that's where our revolutionary roots have a strong hold. MLK was anti-capitalist. Malcolm X was anti-capitalist. We were the Fred Hampton Leftists. Fred Hampton was a Marxist-Leninist, guys. So where did we get this idea that Black capitalism is the path to our salvation? Ooh. Capitalism haven't even solved the problem of white poverty. You guys thinking to solve black poverty? You had anything you want to add, Bree? Because I got a lot to say about this, because that's one part. Was you about to add anything in there?
No, go off, King. I'm
okay.
just
okay. So there's a lot of Black capitalist brain rot in our community, and people get upset with me because I do not hold my tongue with the Black community, because I'm sorry, because we got to have some hard conversations. The Black boomers sold us out to the police state 2 times. They did in the 90s. They did again with Joe Biden, who's expanding the drug war, by the way, who's expanding the police state, which he said he would do. But Black boomers are not impacted by that, because the police state usually target younger Black people, so not concerned for them. Now, what is up with this individualistic mindset that has poisoned the mind of Black boomers for such a long time? A story, you like to talk about celebrities, Bree, so I'm going to bring this up. Dr. Dre was trending because despite being a billionaire, maybe 800 millionaire, I don't know how much money he has, endless amount of money as far as I'm concerned, his daughter lives in her car. Why do her daughter live in the car? That same pick her up by your bootstrap mentality that our community been brain rotted by. We all grew up by it. Oh, you don't want to spoil your kid, man. You don't want to give them nice things. God forbid that. Do you guys know what the white community do? They spoil the shit out of their kids.
Look at Hunter Biden.
Yeah, look, countless examples. The Trumps, the Bidens, the Pelosi's. I can go on and on and on. So my question to these people, and I still haven't get to the substance of this, but my question to these people is, how did this benefit our community? And like, that's kind of what you brought up. So what is the benefit of quote unquote spoiling your child? Now, if your kid don't have to worry about poverty, if your kid don't have to worry about all this nonsense that you impose on them for no reason, they can focus on education. They can focus on mental health care. They can focus on self-improvement. These are the kind of things that you see white privileged kids do, because for some reason their community haven't been brainwashed. They spoil the crap out of their kids. Meanwhile, there's a Black capitalist mindset where you all on your own. You got to fend on your own. If you mess up, that's your fault and not the fault of the system that we, the black boomers, propped up. So while I've been challenging people, and a lot of people don't like my tone, but this is my community, so I talk to them how I want, to be honest. And I want to add a story too, because this story kind of ties in, and I want to give you guys thoughts. Because the reason why because this ties into what I'm about to say. The reason why I found your conversation with Glenn Lowry, I shared this conversation and this story multiple times on my show. Because when I went and canvassed in South Carolina, I had talked to a ton of black conservatives. And do you guys know how many conversations ended up just like the conversation you had with Glenn Lowry? That's almost, if you handle it right, that's almost always be the end conclusion. Now I'm gonna share the story real quick, and I'll pass it right back to you guys. I was in South Carolina, and when I was down there, I almost wanted confrontation. So and you guys saw the pictures I used to post on Twitter. I will wear full socialist gear, like unapologetic socialist gear.
What is socialist gear? What does that mean?
I had like eat the rich, like socialism, that kind of stuff. Like I wasn't hiding what I stood for. There we go. That I had shirts like "End the Wars, Tax the Rich, Eat the Rich." I had Bernie everywhere, and people saw Bernie. That alone triggered them in South Carolina, where they still on socialists. That kind of ties into the story I'm about to tell. I actually got two, but I'll only tell one of them. So, because I talked to a lot of these people, and it always super enjoyable. That's why I enjoyed the debate you guys had. So I talked to this guy, and I was with my white friend, and she was a Republican who liked Bernie. That's a story for a whole nother day. So she's she's my witness because she saw this go down. This guy I was trying to canvass and I was trying to talk to, he said, I'm a black Republican. And he came out hostile at first because he saw me in Bernie gear. So he's like, you're a socialist? How can you be black and a socialist? Boy. Like he came super hostile. Now, I know that I was supposed to represent the Bernie campaign. So I probably wouldn't have him this well, but I'm like, okay, let me collect myself. Let me have a conversation with this guy. And I legitimately was talking to him. I was like, so why do you consider yourself a black Republican? Why do you believe conservative policies are the policies that will uplift black people? And now his argument was, because I wanted to hear his argument before I debunk him. He said, well, liberal Democrat policies, they tear apart the black family. And liberals, they don't respect how much having the nuclear family would improve black society. You guys, once again, deploy yourself by your bootstrap commentary he was adding on to that. Now, I simply posed a very simple question. I don't understand how these people don't reach this conclusion. Because one thing he was mentioning, like how the black father's not there. So I proposed to him, what would help the black family more than having a 4-day work week so the black father can be there more? What would be better for the black family, as you mentioned, Bree, in that debate? Because I told you, these conversations tend to go the same way. Why not pay the black family a living wage? So one of the reasons why we have you don't have two parents in the household like you used to. You don't have someone staying at home. You don't have someone seeing the kids, because back in the day, you can live and you can have a thriving family with only one parent working. So I propose them, why don't we go back to that? So my thing is, my dad and my mom would love to have been there, but my mom was working 2 jobs. My dad used to work a factory job where he used to work insane amount of days. Look at Frito-Lay. Imagine how many workers at Frito-Lay.
Oh, my grandfather used to work at Frito-Lay in Cleveland.
Now imagine, once again, they'll force people to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. How can you complain about the black father not being there if you're not giving him adequate time off? And the funny thing is, I mentioned these things, and I'm gonna short my story. I went through a ton of policy. I'm like, all right, if you want the black family to be there, why not go after the criminal justice system that keep locking us up? Like, okay. And then he was like, at the end of the conversation, he started off hostile. He like, actually, do I like your politics? That conversation happened a lot. Now, I don't know if Glenn didn't outright say that, but Glenn had to, when I noticed your conversation, he had to concede a lot. And that would kind of remind me of that. And that's kind of the conversation I had with a lot of black people who had to pull yourself by your bootstrap mentality. I pass to your Bree. Any thoughts?
No, I completely agree. I think that so often people on the broad left, liberals, they are insecure about accepting the premise on some level. You know, it's not conceding. You know, they expect you to have a big fight about parents, the value of parents being in the home. I'm not going to argue with you about that. Of course, everybody wants parents around all the time. I'm not like some weird eighth wave feminist. Like, that's not what this is about. I don't care which of the parents, but somebody's got to be around. Like, so let's talk about making that easier. And then oftentimes they're all imbalanced and they don't know what to do now that you've accepted the, yes, the point that I made during the discussion with Professor Lowry was, all the studies that have shown that giving parents money is the best thing to do to equalize school performance, because it just means that someone doesn't have to work that early morning shift and can instead make sure that there's breakfast in the kid and they're not hypoglycemic all day until lunchtime. Like, I'm with you. Let's do that. Let's enable that. Let's make it so that people have childcare and they're not running around between shifts trying to drop their kid off in some unlicensed place where who knows what might happen to them, and they get traumatized in various ways. Let's give, I was getting my hair braided recently, and there was this woman who was clearly at the end of her rope, dealing with she had a baby and like an 11-year-old who was like curious and sweet the way the 11-year-olds are doing, asking a million questions, but it was hot and stuffy and nobody wanted to be in this hair salon. And she was losing her temper, this mother. And I remember thinking to myself, somebody's going to look at this situation and say, this is just like a bad mother. But I'm looking at the situation and saying, she is through. She is stressed. Someone needs to get this woman childcare. She was balancing a meal on one knee, trying to eat it out of the styrofoam container while her 11-year-old was running around and this baby was crying on her hip. And I was like, this is not a conducive situation for positive mothering for anybody in this world. And whether or not you come to one conclusion or another about what's at fault in that situation, I think really comes down to how you feel about humanity and human nature. And I find that a lot of conservatives are inclined to believe the worst of humans, as opposed to believing that there's a lot of stuff is situational and based on their circumstances and not based on their innate desire. Because this woman obviously loves her kids, and I'm a humanist, and that's what drives my politics. And that's my guiding star. And I think a lot of conservative people would like, if you challenge them on their underlying assumptions, a lot of them are very religious, there's a way you can access that fundamental, switch about whether or not you're going to attribute this to human nature. Like, are humans kind of inherently good or inherently bad? And my personal belief is, like, even if they were inherently bad, that doesn't help me. Like, who cares? What am I going to do about it? Send people to the gulag? No, we got to deal with people. So I choose to believe in structure policy with the belief that free will is relatively limited in a world with the level of precarity that we have, and that we've got to do as much as we can to make people truly free and trust that they're going to make the best choices by keeping the boot off of their neck. And that is why I identify as a socialist, and that is why my politics are what they are.
Well said, Bree. There's one more thing. I'll toss it to Finney, get your thoughts here. But I want to highlight this because this is important, because I always mention this. You guys realize the conversation that me and Bree had with our fellow Black conservatives, and many I have, and how we was able to reach them. You guys understand that there's no way a liberal Black person is able to reach them, right? There's no way that if you're a Black supporting Democrat, you'll be able to reach them, because what is the argument that we used? We outflanked the entire party to the left. So if you're one of the people, if you're a liberal Democrat, can you use incarceration as your argument when you support Barack Obama and Joe Biden? What they do, and the reason why your conversation ends, because if you are a liberal Democrat, and this go across the line, not even about Black people, and you trying to talk to a conservative, they're like, well, you like Obama. Like, your policies is the reason why our community, like, so you can't reach that ground. So these are the conversations that Black leftists can reach conservatives on, because we can actually call out both parties. If you're stuck in partisan mindset, you will not be able to reach these people, because 100%. I have to go outside the line, because there's a point in the conversation, I was trying to keep my story short, but he was like, well, the Democratic Party was doing that. I'm like, yeah, fuck the Democratic Party. So then we actually started bonding more when they realized, like, yeah, he don't like Democrats too, so he actually cares about what's going on. But when you actually a Democrat, he would think that you don't really care. You're just trying to be a partisan. Now, what's your thoughts, Finney? But I want to add that point, because that's crucial when it comes to flipping people. I flipped so many people, and I'm in the red state. I talk to conservatives all the time, like, what about Obama? Fuck them. And then they're like, especially since I'm Black, to be honest, they get interested and they're more willing to hear you out. That's why you can't be a partisan bootlicker. You got any thoughts you want to share with us, Finney?
And I just want to say, like, leftists, abolitionists, radical Black communists like myself, like, we are very optimistic people. Like, we want to dismantle the roots of violence in order to get actual care in our communities. And if people who fundamentally understand that you genuinely care about human beings, most of the time they get that. Because I've talked to white conservatives, never talked to a black conservative before. But when the Proud Boys and all those white supremacists came out here in DC all those times last winter, I had a couple conversations with a few of them that were bearable enough to talk to. And, at the end of the day, the culture war keeps us all divided. It's all the distraction. But the real target of power is that economic power. And Kwame Ture says, if you want to end poverty, give people money. You know what I'm saying? For real.
Yeah.
So if you are targeting the source of their power, and like a lot of the people that are on the opposite side of us are also targeting that economic source of power as well, a lot of the times, you can find some common ground. It's just the anti-racism that we need to, hop into. And even with Black conservatives and Black capitalists, I've realized like there's an intrinsic, like they believe that there are intrinsic reasons why the Black community is what it is, but without really acknowledging the extrinsic reasons of the system and everything else that's going on. And, Black capitalists, I've also noticed, don't support reparations. Well, if you don't support reparations, if you don't support, repairing the community and actually atoning for all of the irreparable harms that have been committed against us since slavery and on, then what are we really talking about here? Do you actually care about the Black community? Do you actually care about
a whole episode on reparations and all of my efforts to connect, get the Briahna campaign to connect its fight against the 1% to a valid claim for reparations, and talking about, my grand plan, which ended up getting derailed because of the heart attack, was for him to go to Mississippi, which used to have more millionaires per capita than any other state in the union because of slavery, and give a speech about the inextricable roots of the mass aggregation of wealth at the top to the slave state, and talk about how all of these companies that are extant today, like Aetna, made all this money on the backs of like insuring slaves so that their owners could collect when the slave died, right? That's where all of that money came from. All of these companies, the Citigroups of the world, the JP Morgan Chases, have been around since long before slavery ended, and making it so that it wasn't this attenuated claim where white people can be like, well, I wasn't here and I didn't do it. Okay, well, we're going to tax those companies that very much were here and did do it, and have basically a legal infrastructure to fund a pool for reparations, instead of having these abstract conversations that are really easily weaponized by white people who aren't here for it. It should have been a very easy fit, I think, for an agenda that's about the 99% versus the 1%. And hopefully one day we'll get a candidate who isn't afraid to acknowledge the obvious historical debt that is owed.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of people also need to acknowledge like the defunding of the military in order for a lot of these things to happen. Like in order for us to reach where we want to go, like we have to really dismantle violence within our country and all the violence that we commit outside of our country. And having 800 military bases all across the world, like that is not okay. And when I talk to people, especially like as a veteran, when I like talking about it from that perspective, it's like, we're spending all these millions and billions and trillions of dollars to do this thing, when we could really be investing in our country. And if you're a true patriot, then why wouldn't you want to invest your money back in your own country?
America first, right?
into making your life materially better, because you're paying all this money, all these millions and billions of dollars that you are, giving to the government. Like, we're all paying these taxes, and they're using that money to do all these other things with it. So why not support our actual communities with that money, instead of, supporting like literal violence, like literal genocide and violence, and ignoring the structural issues within our country. And just Black capitalists just really upset me, because it's just like, you chose the wrong path. Like, yes, we should be rich. Yes, we should be rich in our mindset as Black people. Yes, we should be rich in our Blackness. But to think that individual wealth will uplift the entire Black community when you're literally an exception to a rule in this country is a slap in the face to all the revolutionaries that came before us that told us that this was not it. And for a lot of them to be invoking their names and all their songs and all these other different things, just like, you don't really respect what it means to live by Black radical tradition. And it's just very, very disappointing. Just all the time. Just very disappointing.
Well said, if any.
But
yeah, absolutely. And one more thing I want to shout out to you, Bri. I appreciate you coming on. It was a amazing conversation. We can go all day on these topics, but I just want to ask you one quick rapid fire question because this is in the
Sure. So sorry.
It's no problem. Just
I'll call me to turn it back.
oh, wow. Okay. I just have one quick rapid fire question for you here, and I apologize for everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get some super chats. I'll make sure and try to do some shout outs later. But what's your reaction to Andrew Cuomo resigning?
It's about time. It's obviously really sad that it wasn't the nursing home scandal that brought him down, and also that it took so long for Lindsey Boylan and others who have been, ringing this bell for a long time to be heard. It does feel like we're in a place where Believe Women is very conditional and politicized, and that's the opposite of what the Me Too movement should have wrought. But it is, I guess, ultimately a boon that he is stepping down. We'll see what happens with Chris Cuomo and whether there'll be any consequences for him for aiding and abetting his brother's ability to dodge any media scrutiny, and whether or not there'll be a broader conversation about all of the folks in the media sphere, from Trevor Noah to Jennifer Rubin and everybody else who cheer-led and Cuomo-sexual and all of that stuff, whether there will be any reflection. I'm not holding my breath, but I guess this is one small step for humankind.
I'm gonna say I'm actually surprised. I'll admit, because it's funny because I literally just tweeted like 2 days before the report came out. I was like, dude, I can't believe Cuomo about to get away with this. Like, it looked like he was for a long time. So I'm actually unsurprised that they got him. It's good. We got one guy who's president right now, though, by the way. And one thing you mentioned, Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert. I'll make this last point. I'll pass it to Finney, and then we can wrap up. Why is it okay for Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert to essentially function as state TV for public officials just because they're comedians? Now, what I'm saying is, and I'm gonna do a full comprehensive breakdown on a live stream here soon. We don't got enough time because we got a video that was a compilation of these people and their coverage of Cuomo. So I'm gonna do a breakdown on that very soon. But imagine, and use your imagination. This is why I always say U.S. is the most propagandized country in the world. Imagine if that clip was of Russia, and you see a bunch of Russian comedians praising Putin like that. The same way, and once again, I'm gonna do a video breakdown here soon, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But when you watch this video, this slice up, it is unbelievable. Like, this is straight up state TV stuff, and this is what we've been calling out. And you look at the date of some of these people, like Vigeland, who was praising him. It's like, this is after the nursing home scandal that you guys was doing this. This is after that Lindsey Boylan already came out. What is wrong with you people? Anyway, Finney, last thoughts, and then we get a last word to Bri here.
Andrew Cuomo is a creep, but as many powerful white men are in this country, it's not really surprising that I think that they pushed him out. They did the same thing to Al Franken. Like, the Democratic Party, once you become a real problem for them, and like really a problem for them in their funding, they will push you out. They don't care. Like, the Republican Party, yes, they'll hold on to their worst ones, but I'm not really surprised that, Andrew Cuomo had to step down. I am curious to see like what accountability looks like. I'm an abolitionist. I don't really believe in like incarceration and all that stuff, but he does need to be held accountable for being like weird. So like, what does that look like past you just not being governor? And I just really hope that we start to really take Believe Women seriously, because Joe Biden should not be president. Like, and that's just a reality situation.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm about to wrap up. I'm just saying. So, like, at what point are we going to like really stick by our values and make our values an action, and not continue to support people like this? Because I'm sure I'm sure Andrew Cuomo is not the only creepy, powerful white man that is left in this system, and all of them need to be called out, and all of them need to be held accountable.
Yeah, and there are a couple of some other races too. who was the lieutenant governor in Virginia when Northam was going through his whole blackface scandal, and there was some issue that the number 2 guy was also going to have a problem because there were some accusations. It's not important. I guess all I'll say is it reminds me the Cuomo-sexual stuff and all of the plaudits he was getting. It reminds me of that Twitter meme that's like, you absolutely do not have to give it to him. Like, you say, oh, you got to give it to him. The worst person you know makes a good point. Like, no, you actually do not have to give it to them. Like, if someone terrible seems to be superficially doing a little something good, like people were praising him over COVID stuff, which wasn't even like, it was propagandistic from the beginning. There was no relationship to Cuomo's behavior and successful Cuomo COVID management in New York City. You absolutely do not have to give it to him. And there are people who will say, you're always such a negative Nancy. Why are you always like, frustrated with folks? And it's like, there are plenty of Trevor Noah's giving it to him. That's not my job. My job is to highlight contradictions and focus attention and pressure where it's needed to make the world a better place, not give politicians and millionaires and the most powerful people on the planet pats on the back. And I don't know why anybody would ever take the position that that's what struggling people and everyday regular people should be doing with their time and energy. So I want to thank both of you for having me on. This has been really rich and like a lot of fun. And I really appreciate the work that you both do on a daily basis. I know it's not always easy, but it's much appreciated.
Yeah, we appreciate you having on. This was a great conversation. I'm definitely looking forward to your conversation with Finney later on when you guys talk about some vet stuff. So thank you. Last word, Bree. Anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
That's all. I mean, I think we're going to release the episode that we put out on Nina Turner's campaign the day before the election with our on the ground reporting on Thursday in full. Part of it was released on free on YouTube already, but you can find us at Bad Faith Podcast. We release a free episode every Thursday, and you can find us on YouTube as well. We appreciate your subscriptions and likes to help the algorithm, and people should obviously subscribe and like to this channel if they haven't already, because this is the kind of media that needs to get boosted.
Thank you, Bree. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone who watched, leave likes and all that stuff. That helps us out a ton because everyone know how suppressed our channel is. So we only grown through word of mouth. So we appreciate everyone who's watching. If you enjoy the stream, hold tight. Wait a minute. We got another episode tonight. Dr. Cornell West will be on 9 p.m. Eastern. Super excited about that. So make sure you guys check that out. We upload every day, so hit the bell as well. Thank you guys for watching. Nick, Finney, Briahna Joy Gray. Signing out. Thank you guys.
Bye.